Hey everyone, hopefully the sound is coming through okay. It should be. Yeah. Just gonna double check the sound. Hey everyone, hopefully the... Yeah, that's there. Cool. Alright. I'm gonna give it a couple of minutes to let people come in. Not that there's gonna be thousands or anything. It'll be a basic Q&A. I've got a few questions that people have sent me in a little document. A couple of things to promote, actually. Yeah, other than that, put any questions that you want to ask in the comments, and I'll try to get to them. Okay, I'll get rolling. I'm going to start actually with a couple of bits of promo that I will then hit again at the end. Firstly is a book that's coming out with Aeon Books by myself. I put the link in the chat, which is a spiritual introduction to Christianity. It's a fairly short book that's focusing on the spirituality of Christianity, because it's somewhat avoided as an entryway into Christianity. And then, so that's out in September. And then the other book is my collection of short stories. There's a Man Crying in the Street, which you can get on Amazon. And I will get the UK link for that as well. So yeah, if you want to grab them as a way of support, or if you're just interested, then please do so. I'd be very thankful if you did. So yeah, this is a basic Q&A. I mean, firstly, I want to start with the fact that the reason for the Q&A is because the podcast has hit 20,000 subscribers. So a big thank you. Firstly to guests. I want to thank the guests first. 20,000. It's pretty astounding to me that this little niche podcast is at 20,000 YouTube subscribers, and then wherever else, it's tough to even compile them because that data is pretty all over the place. But 20,000. So, firstly, a big thank you to all the guests, because it's all volunteered time, and they're all taking time out of their days for me to talk about their work. So, huge thank you to any guests, and especially repeat guests who've come on multiple times. Like a big thank you for you to them, because it literally is impossible without them. Then patrons that are paying, that keep everything sort of running. Big thank you. And if you want to support, head over to the Patreon. It's all, obviously massively appreciated. But ultimately, just a big thank you to everyone who is a subscriber, who has, supported, who has listened, who has downloaded, who has watched. Just a big thank you to anyone who has supported. So here's to 30,000, basically. 20,000, like a year ago just seemed, 4 years ago, it seemed way off. But yeah, here we are. Things slowly grow. I like the way, to be honest, I like the pace it's growing. It's actually not growing, at some extreme pace. I like the fact that the audience tends to stay pretty focused and niche, and it's a very calm audience, and I really like that. So I like the direction it's going. I like the pace and the growth, and yeah, it's great. So all that said, there's a couple of books that if you want to support the podcast, they're in the chat. And yeah, ultimately this is sort of like a celebratory Q&A for 20,000 subs. So basically just a big thank you to everyone. But I'll get through I'll begin with questions. The first, so there's a comment. I'd like to see some reviews on William H. Gass. So I have two books by Gass. One is In the Heart of the Country, a collection of short stories. And I've read the first story in that, and I am trying at the moment to not give too much time to pessimistic works and misery books, because I've spent years doing that, and I'm on a bit of a happiness kick, even though it might not seem might not seem it from my tiredness, but I'm enjoying the flowers, and I'm enjoying happiness, and I'm enjoying being fairly healthy. So there is a point where writers like Gass, writers like Chiron, writers like Schopenhauer, you eventually are just like, what am I doing? I'm just making myself miserable reading this stuff over and over and over again, and I'm making the choice to do that. So Gass, yeah, maybe in time. I also have The Tunnel by Gass, and The Tunnel by Gass is one of these peculiar books that's extremely rare, that is actually too good. The prose is too good, and I've got about a third way in, and I just can't go forward because the prose is so good that it actually gets quite exhausting and actually sort of defeats itself. It's clearly a masterpiece, but it's a masterpiece that defeats itself. So maybe it isn't. But he's clearly an astounding writer who has an incredible control of language, and I would love to read his philosophy stuff. I've only read, what I've said I read, which is just the one short story and the third of The Tunnel. A Tunnel seems to be one of those books that a lot of people quit. And as I say, it also falls into the whole misery sells genre of literature, which actually gets kind of tiring. So someone says, annoying question, I know, but any plans to have Bob Dobbs on again? So the one thing I'd like to speak to Bob Dobbs about, and I think I said this last time, and really I put books aside and bookmark books, and when I get the feeling of I really want to read that or really want to go there, then I'll go there. So the one thing I would love to talk to Bob about is Finnegan's Wake in relation to McLuhan, in relation to all the secondary Finnegan's Wake text. But there's a ton of caveats there, which is one, I haven't read much Joyce. Two, Finnegan's Wake is a huge undertaking anyway. And, and three, just there's a general kind of large amount of research that I'd need to do for that. But that's the one thing I'd love to talk to Bob about, because in all the chats I've had with Bob, that's what he's mentioned every single time. And I've listened to a couple of Bob's talks on Finnegan's Wake and McLuhan. And they're, it's really incredible stuff. And another tangent on that is actually I just recorded an episode on Friedrich Kittler with Jeffrey Winthrop Young. For those who don't know, Friedrich Kittler, to be very rough and ready on this, is sort of the equivalent of like a German McLuhan chain-smoking media ecologist, a bit of a madman with thoughts on war and the military and on the ontologies of separate medias. But the interesting thing about Friedrich Kittler is that he has the same sort of appreciation of gravity's rainbow in the same way that McLuhan does Finnegan's Wake. So that's coming up as well. Thoughts on uptake of profane religion, where it's all about debates, owning the opponent, and cult of personality state. You can see this with both Islam and Christianity. Yeah, I mean this debate. Ultimately, this, I know exactly what you're talking about, which is the highly online, you've been owned. Christopher Hitchens destroys 10 times. Sam Harris obliterates Christians, or whatever it might be. This all began in the early 2000s with a new atheist movement that conflate the entirety of debate. They condense it to a certain very low-grade intellectual sphere and condense it into a certain form of logic. And ultimately, if you're not very good at that form of rhetoric, that form of logical games, that form of, aha, I got you, it seems like you've lost. But as with the book that I've written for on Spiritual Introduction to Christianity, one thing that's forgotten with all of this, and I, one of the, ultimately, just to get this out of the way, one of the problems with myself and the Catholic Church, on a theological level, is that I don't believe there is an argument for the existence of God in the like the literal sense. If there was, everyone would be a believer, and if there was a watertight argument against, and everyone would stop believing, like the episode of The Simpsons where Homer says, "Oh, I've disproved Jesus," and Ned Flanders has to burn it. So ultimately, there is an experience. We're talking about religion, we're talking about the spirit, we're talking about spirituality. We're ultimately talking about as far as I'm concerned, a primarily experiential domain. And so when you get to this whole idea of profane religion and debates and I gotcha, it doesn't really cut the mustard, because no one's. I will say, and actually, in the introduction to my book, I actually say that I've never known a debate to move sides. I've never known a debate to really change anything. And debate for me there's a great irony in the idea of debate, which is so close to argument. But debate is really, and this is what debates are, is side A and side B. And the fact of the two sides are debating and having that sort of headlock of trying to prove something means that ultimately they've already admitted that they're not open, right? They're like, they want to stay on one side. So that whole thing is very boring, and it makes people feel like they know something, even though if they went away and actually thought about what they know, they haven't learned anything at all. And what this really is the internet as the ultimate algorithm of choosing you things that agree with what you already believe, and then you walking away and thinking you've learned something and feeling very self-righteous, even though you haven't gained anything at all. It's just basically intellectual, let's be honest here, it's intellectual masturbation. And these debates have been going on for over 20 years now, and what's come of it? So, but there's also a more profane element of people using religion. We see this a lot. You mentioned Andrew Tate, you mentioned a lot of cults of personalities, people using Christ, using certain religions as a foundation, as a justification foundation. And it seems like their priors aren't really in the right place. If you're utilizing religion as a tool, well, it seems an inherently worldly act to do that. Could I please link the Bob Dobbs lectures on McLuhan? I can't find them right now because Bob's site that's going to be tough to find. But if you go on Ion and Bob, whatever it is, .blogspot.com, they're on there somewhere. Would love to see more tech shows on Uncle Ted and Jacques Ellul. More tech critical is based and necessary. Yeah, I'd like to do more Ellul. There's a ton more in Ellul, maybe not so much Kaczynski, though supposedly rumor has it there is a third volume. There was a third volume that Kaczynski wrote before he died, that was largely finished before he died, that at some point it's going to be published. Whether or not that happens, who knows. Who stole your background bookshelf? I moved into another room to keep all my work. That other room was my lounge, and I wanted to keep all my work in one room. There's a little bit of an echo in here, which for the live is probably going to be more there, but obviously in the pre-recorded ones I remove it with some handy AI software. Really like your Byung-Chul Han videos. Any more psychopolitics authors in mind? Well, Eric Butler, who I've had on to discuss Léon Blois and The Devil and Its Advocates, translated, is the translator of psychopolitics into English, so I'm hoping at some point I can twist his arm again to come on for a third time and discuss psychopolitics. I'm just going through the chat ones before I get to the other ones. What do I think of the recent riots in England? Dear me. Well, I want to try be somewhat of a voice of reason for this. So for me, the riots in England, one of the problems with this is that England, in terms of this sort of disruption, and I'll explain why I put that in quotation marks. This kind of disruption is fairly rare in England, probably because we don't have guns and we're a fairly, stiff upper lip, just give you a silent nod type nation, very old nation as well. And when this kind of news spreads far and wide over the globe, over social media, and I'm sure this is the same for every other country as well, but when you know the country, it's once again, for me, the riots was an extension of the conflation that London and then a few major cities in the UK are the whole of the UK, as if this small vertical strip with about 5 dots on it is the whole UK. And anyone who lives in rural areas or sort of middling rural areas, which is a massive, vast amount of the UK, this is a sort of a frustration when you see these things that, oh my God, the UK has fallen. No, there's about a few hundred people in 4 cities being knobheads. So what do I think of the recent riots? They are riots, they're not protests. They began, it seems, from seemingly nothing. And as far as I can see, there is zero principle beneath any of the rioting. And the anti-immigration sentiment, as far as I'm concerned, was projected onto the riots afterwards. Now, many people will get up in arms about that and say, oh, no, that's not true. But the riots really were completely unprincipled, just events of destruction. And if someone wishes to try convince me or many other people that in your own town, which this happened in about 3 or 4 locations, that burning down a shoe store, looting a Greggs, and basically smashing the windows of your own community is somehow political sentiment for anti-immigration, then I would love to hear that argument. Now, if you want the broader picture on that in terms of the UK, and people want to have a sensible debate about the effects of immigration in poorer areas, fine. But the riots is one of, it really is just riots, and pretty despicable. And, but once again, it's a certain sort of small vertical column in the middle of the UK that isn't the entire UK. And there, despite being a very small nation, anyone who lives here will tell you that there is a lot of difference in the nation. There's a lot of small different groups, etc., etc. So, yeah. When will you do an episode on the book Jonathan Livingston Seagull? I have been looking for a while for, I wanted a book specifically about seagulls and self-realization, and until I found that book, there was nothing that I knew existed that covered that niche. No, I'm not doing an episode on Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Right, so this is going over to the other questions, and I'm sure I will get a lot of comments about my comments on the riots, which I'm completely fine with. I try to keep a level head on such things. As soon as I will put it this way, and just another comment on the riots, as soon as any political faction does, or any mass of people that seemingly are cohering under some sort of seemingly political atmosphere, even though there wasn't such a thing, do something that is completely untargeted, that basically is complete unbridled destruction born from ultimately a sort of death drive, in the sense of there's hundreds of us in the street, we're just going to smash everything in sight, and in which case many innocent people who are completely, nurses and whatever it was in the news get hurt. I have no interest. I don't care what political side. I have no side of left or right. I have absolutely no interest in such in violence and destruction of that kind. So there you go. So to the other questions that have been sent to me: is occultism optimistic, realistic, or pessimistic? I would say realistic. If you're delving deep into your experience and questioning what might be the ego or the self or whatever it's called, or the mind, and beginning to see, A.R. Araj, one of the greater students of Gurdjieff, said the final grade of esoteric teaching is just plain common sense. So one could argue that the end result of occultism and this sort of esoteric practice is literally being able to see the world as it is, quite ironically. I'm going to go with the chat. when I can, because they'll fly past. Someone said, thank you for what I do. Thanks very much. Thanks to you for listening. Alan S. in the chat says, what are your thoughts on Michel Houellebecq? I've read a fair few Houellebecqs. I've read, the one I enjoyed the most was Submission. I've read Whatever, Atomized, and Serotonin. And there was, for a while, right, I thought that Houellebecq was much like a Louis Ferdinand Céline, or any other sort of pessimistic, even maybe a Thomas Bernhard. And then I will be very plainly honest about this. I don't know if anyone has seen this, but there's a recent trailer, and I don't know if the full documentary is out, but there's a recent trailer about Houellebecq going to Amsterdam. And in that is a clip of a semi-sexual clip of Houellebecq with a young woman. And in that clip, there's a realization, as far as I'm concerned, that Houellebecq isn't actually being that clever in these books. This isn't some Bret Easton Ellis comment. This isn't a Bernhardian existential angst at the way things are. He genuinely is a fairly, as far as I can actually see, a fairly despicable nihilist who's completely given into that current. And if that is the truth, I really have not much interest in it, to be honest. Are you going to read Houellebecq's new novel? I'm going to review it. Because I believe I'm right in saying it's the final novel. It's also very long. It's 500 pages, which I think will be his longest book. So I'm intrigued as to what his sort of conclusions are of this sort of political trajectory that he's seeing for France. That'd be interesting. I think he is a good writer. I think his minimalism is great. But in terms of his cultural conclusions, I don't have too much interest in the man. And I think in terms of what I said about him actually being the nihilistic figures that he seems to be critiquing in his books, one needs to only look at a picture of the man to see what being possessed by that nihilistic force does to you. What is my favourite song by Tame Impala? I don't like Tame Impala, same way I don't like Pink Floyd. Have I read Solenoid by Cotarescu? I have a copy of Solenoid, and once again, I've really have started to move away from these lengthy, bleak, postmodern, highly complex works, and I couldn't get through Solenoid. There's something to be said for cleverness, but sometimes things feel clever for clever's sake. So sort of, I'm in a stage where I'm moving back towards more classics, early works. Probably the next review I'll do will be the Satyricon. I'm moving away from my dorky archive era because it gets exhausting, and there's a point where you just rather would just read simple, sincere classic literature. And I just haven't read enough classics at this point in my life, and I feel I should. So the other questions I've been asked: do you have any advice for someone who may, faced with all the hard questions, need to find solace? Do you have any advice for someone who may, faced with all the hard questions, needing to find solace in the fact that they will have to live with only ever getting the gist of anything? So finding solace in the fact you'll only ever get the gist of something and not the full picture. Well, I think, we could actually go to a comment from Arthur Schopenhauer about this. So Schopenhauer, he has this comment about reading, and he says not to read widely. He says pick a few authors, pick a few books, and really study them. And actually now that after years of being a grab bag reader and a jack of all trades, it is one of my regrets, even at 30, that I didn't have maybe like 4 or 5 who I really got to grips with. So my answer there is to really put the cost aside and find someone who you keep going back to and really try and understand it. But at the same time, this idea of getting a gist, knowledge does have its limits. So, there might be a possibility there of grasping at something that it's not necessarily that you want to know a certain thing, that you want control. I mean, when has a sufficient amount of knowledge ever satiated the desire? I can only ever get the gist of anything. That's what it is to be human. I don't think there's ever going to be a point where you know so much that you go, oh, okay, that's done. Except in experience. Someone says, as we all change our opinions over time, I'm interested to know what do I currently think about the book Meditations on the Tarot. I haven't read it since I did that series, but if I was to go back to it now, I would still consider it a masterpiece. Does the modern conception of love, with a capital L there, does the modern conception of love exist in actuality, even if only fleetingly? Well, you've caught me in my love, happiness, flowers moment of my life. I'm on a bit of a high. And it's because these aren't here actually for this, but I will. Anyone who's been speaking to me recently will know what I'm about to show. But it's because of this man, a chap called Barry Long. And Barry Long's little books are so cheesy. I mean, look at that. Wisdom and Where to Find It, right? Called like Stillness is the Way, or Knowing Yourself. And I have to say, there he is again, little Bazza, blonde. And so Barry Long he passed away in 2003. He was a spiritual teacher from Australia, who actually taught, Eckhart Tolle attended some of his meetings, and he clearly had an influence on Tolle. But someone mentioned this in this question about love, and Long, I'll go on Long because he's big on love. And Long would emphasise you can't have love that is to do with attachments. You can't have love that at some point is going to, I love my car, and then you crash it and it's gone. That doesn't really work. Love for him is really synonymous with God, with being, with life. These are all one and the same. And so love for him is a state, not a condition. And so this question about does the modern conception of love exist in actuality, anything that is conditioned and as such will at one point float away, or rise or fall, or whatever it might be, like, dislike, can't really be called love. So there is no such thing as fleeting love. That sounds more like a fancy. Whereas, as I say, Barry Long would say that love is a state, and that seems to work for me. Modern love, the hallmark love, just because someone says I love you or buys a card that has the word love in it loads of times doesn't mean anything. A further question from the people who've sent me them. What do I think of this quote from Alan Watts? I'm not going to read out the whole quote. What do you think about this quote from Alan Watts about Gurdjieff? This is a quote from Alan Watts stating that the point of Gurdjieff was to get you to a point where you realise the whole thing was a joke. And I, to be honest, I would agree. You'll see there's an interview coming up between me and Gary Lackman about Maurice Nicoll, and actually reading Lackman's book on Nicoll, who I'm very fond of, has made me has sort of blown the cobwebs away where Gurdjieff is concerned. Possibly a bully at times, maybe a bit of a megalomaniac, but generally a bit guffed up, a lot of words where they didn't need to be. So I think I'm in agreement with Watts in a way, but mystical teachers and masters need to do what they need to do at certain times. And so I think Gurdjieff was dealing with a very specifically middle-class, largely bohemian type of person that came from deep, deep comfort. And so they really needed to be beasted about by such a man. And then the same person asks, what would Gurdjieff make of a prospective AI mastering the mind? Is there a deeper necessity for humanity's inability to do it? Well, I don't think, Gurdjieff wouldn't be too interested in the mind, because that would be the conscious mind that is really our robotic mind anyway. So if AI masters that, it wouldn't change much, because it's not as if AI mastered our conscious living mind that thinks and makes all the choices and decisions that we make, then it wouldn't change much, because we largely don't make the best decisions for ourselves anyway. Everyone's unhappy anyway, so we would just be programming an AI to be sufficiently unhappy, which I think would be an interesting thing to do. Someone asks me to do a review of Book of the New Sun. I keep meaning to get round to them, but it doesn't feel right. Yet. The same person asks, people often say that you should never meet your heroes. Which one of your literature heroes do you think you would genuinely get along with? Genuinely get along with. They capitalised it. Well, a lot of my literary heroes are fairly, they enjoy solitude. So a literary hero is Thomas Bernhard. But he didn't mind company. He liked coffee and little cakes, and he liked going out and about. So I think if you could just sit with him, and I probably would get on with Bernhard. Not sure what he'd say about me. I do actually think I probably would have got on with Cormac McCarthy, because I come from a working class background and had time as a carpenter, and I know, at least in the UK sense, I spent a lot of time in the kind of bars that he would have been frequenting in Knoxville, sort of. So maybe, but I think he would have, I don't know, said, "What are you doing? Why are you doing a podcast?" What other literary heroes? The other ones, and I'm not too trying to think who else. Maybe Gaddis, William Gaddis. I probably would have enjoyed having a brandy with Gaddis. Not that I drink, but it seems right to have a brandy with him. Yeah. But most of them are fairly, a lot of solitude there. Any other questions are very welcome. What I wouldn't give for a 4 hours. What I wouldn't give for a 4 hour. That's 4 of my own hours out of the day. A Mythics podcast on Swedenborg. There's a lot there in Swedenborg, but it's sometimes it's a bit cheesy. The heaven thing is a bit cheesy, I find, with Swedenborg. This whole idea that when you get to heaven, you will be partnered up with the perfect soulmate, which of course brings back the question of, well, it's going to be a bit awkward if it hasn't been the person you've married. And Swedenborg's heaven as well is very much sort of almost like a quaint, English garden or something. It's a bit ridiculous. I haven't read an absolute ton on Swedenborg, but he's an interesting chap, and I think there's something to be said for his success even today with the Swedenborgian church. Someone said they second the idea of a review of the Book of the New Sun. Well then. All right. I'll do it at some point. It's probably the Satyricon first. So the books that I want to review at the moment are the Satyricon. Well, actually, the first will probably be Frankenstein, because that's what I'm reading at the moment. So Frankenstein, Satyricon, The Strange Life of Ivan Osokin, and then I might get around to the Book of the New Sun. What kind of music have I been listening to lately? I'm pretty sparse on music. Sounds pretentious, but I really like silence. Most of my day is in silence. But at the gym, I listen to High on Fire, who are probably my favourite band in terms of... they probably are my favourite band, High on Fire. What's his name? Sturgill Simpson, I think that's his name. Quite like him. I like a lot of early trance. I still listen to a lot of early trance with its melancholy, like Roger Sanchez and stuff like that. A fair amount of old country, and then it's sort of just like classics. But I don't have too much music. I'm not massively music focused, because I do like I can deal with a lot of silence. Sci-fi authors, novels, both favourites and recommendations. There's a book called Robot by Adam Wazinski Snurg, which not many people know about, which is great. Travis Corcoran's work is of course great, who was on the podcast. Robert Heinlein, Philip K. Dick, all great. Ballard, but Ballard is his own thing. He's Ballardian. I do like Flowers for Algernon. What was the other one? Favourites and recommendations. I don't have too many favourite sci-fi authors, just because I don't read too much sci-fi. Doesn't massively do it for me. Not that there isn't good sci-fi. what do I think about Skrillex meeting with Jordan Peterson? Well, it's like, I think in a way it's almost like the previous 15 minutes of fame archetype meeting the future 15 minutes of fame archetype. Two people one person who culturally doesn't matter anymore, and he's meeting someone who eventually culturally will not matter anymore, because Jordan Peterson, please, if you're watching this, and I know you're an avid listener, please stop, take a break, man. Just breathe, eat your steak, eat your carnivore diet, I don't mind. Just sit back, man. Chill out. Like, go look at the flowers, Jordan Peterson. Read Barry Long. Look, I think at a certain point in time, very, very early, Jordan Peterson was clearly an accomplished psychology professor for undergraduates who had a way of teaching in the sense that you understand things very quickly, very accessibly, and broaden the scope of psychology into the fields of Jung, Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, into literature. I don't think that can ever be taken away from him, that he's an accomplished teacher at a certain level. But he has overstepped the mark and become a commentator who, much like Hannah, I believe it's Hannah Arendt when she writes of Heidegger very early on, that you'd go along to these 2-hour lectures with Heidegger and it would be like excitement, like for Peterson, motivation, ambition, pick up a rock, like bang, 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 and you have this real feeling that something is happening, right? And then the talk would end, you'd click off the video and we'd be like, yeah, I'm going to sort everything out, man. And you'd finish the video and you realise, and this is Aaron on Heidegger as well, that you haven't got anything. There's nothing there. You haven't taken anything in. Like, no knowledge has been gained. And this is, I think, why there's for me, a frustration in a way, because at a certain point, Jordan Peterson really was speaking to a certain group of people that really, really needed that voice and had a way to do that. And then it moved into just this sort of, to be honest, pseudo-motivational, just boring, empty political stuff. And he needs to take a break. He needs to calm down. How much did peating change your life? Well, I think there's like cornerstones of peating stuff that I will never revert back to. So removing seed oils and PUFAs from, removes such a ton of inflammation and tiredness. And then, the need to occasionally have a sort of cleanse in a way with the peat salad that I don't eat, I eat it maybe once a week, but the grated carrot salad genuinely makes you feel incredible. And then just adding basic things such as mushrooms. But peat is the nutritional Buddha Vista, I think he's an original nutritional philosophical thinker in his own right. I genuinely believe that. I think, I think regenerative energy is a must read, and not only in terms of what nutrition is at a higher holistic level, but what it can be. But also, it's most importantly a book against learned helplessness. Yeah. When will you do an episode with Chris from Meme Analysis? The only person on the internet more intellectual and better read than me. I don't know him. There's a lot of people on the internet that are more intellectual and better read than me. No. I don't know. I was going to meme some names, but I don't know. Jordan Peterson's one. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Hope you interview some Gurdjieff people again. Robin Bloor. I don't know Stefan Sewell and Joseph Azizi. So Azizi, I believe, is working on a book on J.G. Bennett that hopefully when that's released I can talk to him about that, because Bennett's an interesting figure in his own right. But please keep the questions coming. But while more questions come in, I can run through some upcoming episodes. So next week is on Darwin, Charles Darwin, Emily Dickinson and Disenchantment with René Berglund, which is a great conversation, very fun. And a really interesting re-understanding of Darwin. After that is JMG, John Michael Greer, on the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Great as always. And then we've got the Maurice Nicoll chat. Well, actually, before that, is one that people have been asking for a long time, and it's really long. It's an hour and 3/4 on the life and work of Guy Debord, Society of the Spectacle, blah 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 blah. It's really good, with a chap called Edward Matthews, who's a Debord scholar. And then the Maurice Nicoll. There's also another episode with James Maffey on Aztec ethics. Another episode with Kevin Hart on his biography, which was really good, and that's one will be really interesting for British people. There's a lot of distinctly British chatter in that one. And then today I recorded one with Aaron French, which is it's a really niche discussion, which is hidden away in the history of esotericism, which is on Rudolf Steiner and Max Stirner, because Steiner's Philosophy of Freedom, his one of his great books, is directly influenced by Max Stirner. And Rudolf Steiner was the best man of John Henry Mackay at his wedding, the Max Stirner biographer. So that one is to come. And then, as I said, the Friedrich Kittler, the German media ecologist, which is also a talk around Heidegger, Lacan, and this sort of strange, possibly slightly Hegelian understanding of media ecology, which is intriguing. And for the fans of things like Spengler and Junger, etc., I'm hoping to record an episode with Jeffrey Winthrop Young, who I spoke to about Kittler, on the sort of interwar between World War I and World War II period in terms of the movements of how technology was understood then, and also how media was understood, with figures like Junger, with Das Arbeiter, the worker, Dominion and Form, figures like Spengler, but then also you've got the German Conservative Revolution. So there's going to be a fair amount of research for that one, but it should be a good discussion. Yeah. So that's what's coming up. And in September, I'm recording a discussion with Emily Herring on her biography of Henri Bergson, which is a great biography. Everyone should buy it. Yeah, I'm trying to think what else is upcoming. Fair amount of stuff. Always stuff in the pipeline. There's a feeling that I've missed one there, because I've got a lot in the pipeline at the moment. Yeah. Yeah. Any more questions? Please let me know. I'll check. There's no more comments. No more questions. All right. Well, I'll say again. I'm not going to finish just yet, but I'll say again. Thanks to everyone for 20k. Very exciting. Yeah. I never expected it to be 20k, but soon enough it'll probably be larger and larger and larger. Sam K, what is your answer for the Hermetics question? It's been so long. I haven't thought about it for so long, and I thought about the Hermetics question the other day, and I was like, man, I really used to do that. What is my answer now for the Hermetics question would be, Gurdjieff would still be there. I do want to meet that man. Peculiar being. Gurdjieff would be there. Possibly Edith Stein, Saint Teresa would be there. I would have loved to have met her. Maybe Thomas Bernhard, but I don't know. You get to this point where you read so much that you realize how much of people's ideas are in books. So you really want more conversationalists, or people that could do something like someone spiritual or something like that. Maybe go right back, like the Buddha. Just be like, hey man, come on, sort me out. Yeah, I'll go for that. I'll go for the Buddha. Yeah, there you go. There's your three. But the thing with that is the philosophers. How many philosophers would you really want to spend time with? Friedrich Hitler is really nice. I read his book, Optical Media. Quite dense but informative. He is somewhat technologically determinist. Well, this is something I discussed with Winthrop Young in the discussion about how the scholarship veers actually on this technological determinism. And I guess the move away from technological, like the just on this question of technological determinism, is holding on to an anthropocentrism with regards to man's position in relation to technology that Hitler is consistently detached from, or trying to detach from. Who's my favourite Discord kitten? Dear me. Dear me. Yeah. And hopefully me and JMG Gray are going to record a sort of election special again nearer, I believe it's November, the American election, but just about the political pendulum swinging more towards the right, what we're seeing, where it's going to end up, etc., etc., and JMG's thoughts on such things. I'm a little bit split on which way I think it's going to go, but there you go. Will I give a shout out to my your big friend, Big Chaz? He's a big fan of the show. Chaz, if you're listening, thanks, buddy. I believe I've spoken to you literally hundreds of times, and you're in a reading group, but big thank you for listening. Hi from a recent subscriber. What do you think about psychedelics and their role and influence in culture? You know, I recently finished becoming normie. I'm becoming a bit of a normie, but I recently finished and read for the first time Ram Dass's Be Here Now. I think it's really good, actually. I think it's really accomplished work. It wasn't huge on the middle section. I was first and last section. Great. But in that, I mean, there's one of the more intriguing things is that Ram Dass probably took more LSD and whatever, like literally whatever, than most people ever will, whoever have lived. And even he basically said that it gets to the point where, well, I mean, it got to the point with him and Timothy Leary where he was like drinking acid out of the bottle. I'm not sure how it works, but just what would normally, I guess, fry someone else's brain. They were just drinking it because they were just at this sort of constant level. And his basic point was the problem with it was that you always have to come down. And so what do I think about psychedelics? I would probably be, I'm in a balanced way, I'm in most degree. I haven't done any psychedelics. I don't really have an interest I don't have an interest in drugs. And I don't drink. I used to. But Uspensky, P.D. Uspensky, he says, look, well, drugs don't really have a direct role to play in esoteric work or that kind of thing. But what they can do, you can give them to someone and it can show them what the effects will be when they get to the top of the mountain. And then that acts as sort of an impetus to get there. Now, for people who are mystically inclined or spiritually inclined, that sort of makes sense. But if they're already mystically or spiritually inclined, then I don't think they need the psychedelics. And the reason I say that is that those that aren't spiritually inclined, people who take psychedelics, or people who smoke tons of pot or do drugs, the tendency, and I've never seen an exception to this rule in my own life, is that in time, the only thing they are able to talk about or be excited about is not anything, the content of what happens from taking the drugs, but is just the drugs themselves. All they talk about is the next high, or oh my god, LSD is amazing. Well, tell me anything that happened that, and of course maybe it's an experiential problem, but that's my general thoughts. Is that, but that's not me saying that psychedelics have a negative effect on culture, but I just haven't seen it enough from them to warrant this kind of discussion on them. I don't know. Have I read anything from Sadie Plant? I would have read Zeros and Ones a long, long time ago. Couldn't tell you much about it now, I'm afraid. Any comments on the opening? The opening of the Olympics. I didn't watch the opening of the Olympics just because I missed it. In terms of that sort of reactionary understanding of it, I mean, for people who are in that mindset, are you surprised? Whatever. But I've watched a lot of the Olympics. Very enjoyable to watch the sport. Really fun to watch it. But in terms of the opening of the Olympics, I mean, you know, what those positions have already been made up. So what's interesting about that? Do I know about zero accelerationism? Yeah, the guy who wrote it is you shouldn't. He's an idiot. Someone said it. Okay. Yeah. So, but do you do any exercise from Gurdjieff? Do you have a group? What do you think of the work in the modern world? So 3 questions there. Do I have any exercise from Gurdjieff? I mean, there's a lot of little exercises hidden around in all the Gurdjieff literature. Do I have a group? There was a while when I was running 2 Beelzebub's Tales reading groups, which has since gone. Whether or not I ever do that again, I don't know. Likely not, because they're 84-week long reading groups, and it's a lot of time and energy. If you mean, do I go to a group? I did at some point. I don't anymore. What do I think of the work in the modern world? I think, as a general rule, and this isn't towards any specific. This isn't even really to do with Gurdjieff. It's to do with spiritual currents where at a certain point in time there was a de facto leader who had the, whatever you want to call it, the energy that meant they were either enlightened, advanced, realized, developed, whatever it is. So your Gurdjieffs, your Rudolf Steiners, your Crowleys, whoever, right? If there's any group that is based around such people, my general feeling is, and it's a bit deflating because it means you have to find your own, is that those groups basically don't really last outside of the leader. You can sometimes have an era of disciples that just about hold it together, but once you're on to the second generation, it sort of begins to really dissipate. And I think that applies to anything. And then you're left with a sort of problem of dogma and what's right and what's not. And I think the ultimate truth with that is that the truth, to quote someone like Guénon, right, the truth is like a flower. It grows in a certain era, in a certain blossom, like in a certain way, and then it dies and disintegrates, but it's the same genus, it's still the truth, but then it grows again. And so like every generation needs its Gurdjieff, every generation needs its Steiner. So the work in the modern world, it's changing constantly, and you know, if you need a guru, you need a guru that's alive, that's there. Thoughts on Ray Brazier? I've read Nihil Unbound a long time ago. I couldn't give you too much of an in-depth thing. It was a great text on nihilism, and his general pronouncement in terms of the philosophy of nihilism being a place of speculative, sort of almost optimism, is great. I mean, I think he's one of the few philosophers to really take nihilism seriously. Yeah. Having seen 6 videos of me, would you see yourself being anti-modernist, if not reactionary, or like postmodern, post-liberal? I mean, there's just so much definitions in the word. I'm not trying to avoid the question, but there's so much, like, okay, anti-modernist. Even though I wrote Exiting Modernity, if you read that book, you'll understand that I'm not anti, I'm not anti a washing machine. I'm not anti the things that have made life more comfortable and easier and alleviated some of the problems that have made just plain old boring things like Hoover, like a Hoover. But there is a modern mindset that is quantifying and rushing and gamified to an extent that just get this done, next thing, and no one really stops to live. So in that sense, I'm critical of the modern mindset that is built from that technological apparatus, but I would put a bit of weight on humans being able to make individual choices and separate themselves from that. So postmodern, post-liberal, those aren't words I can connect to in any sufficient way. if you are asking my politics, just be here now, man. Namaste. I just can't. It's so not to do with politics in any sufficient sense anymore. Like the idea of a left and right anymore. I mean, it's a holistic system of media, technology, culture, and a multitude of things, the agencies of which are completely multifaceted and folded into one another with different potencies. And so to say that there's this simple case of, left and right or whatever it might be, I just cannot subscribe to that anymore. I think it's, and in any sense of, the one thing I think politically that I'm extremely averse to is any sense of going back. You can't go back. People have been a bit more critical with me on this at the moment, but the notion of return, the notion of like a Greek sculpture or something, I think it's bad philosophy, bad politics. Yeah. But ultimately, my politics have changed a lot over the last 6 years, and that's what happens when you constantly reading a lot. There are times when I would have sympathized with positions like primitivism, and now I would just be like, yeah, that's completely stupid. The only way you can be primitivist is to get rid of literally symbolic language. Do I think the HBD thesis is true? I believe I know HBD is human biodiversity, but I don't know what the distinct thesis is. Is this like Hajnal line? I don't get. This is a sort of. There's a form of argumentation that is built atop ifs and buts, and looking back. And what I mean by that is, if you are stating the words if or but or should, you are already implying that the thing has not done that. If only we had, but if it had done this, it should have done this. If you're beginning argumentation and you're beginning your axioms with those words, you're beginning your axiomatic argument, I'm starting to sound like Jordan Peterson. You're constructing a foundation for your argument that is built on top of a reality that you've already admitted isn't. And so things like this, where they're saying, many things are like this when it comes to politics, to be honest, is just an ignorance of reality, and everything has to begin from reality, which I think should be void of any romanticism, whether or not you agree with it. Either way, that is not the state that we're in. And so much political discussion is built on top of a notion that things should be otherwise as they are, that reality is somehow glitched out, and people don't treat reality as reality. They treat it as an error or a glitch or a fault. And from that, you end up in emotional discussions regarding buts, ifs, and shoulds without ever conceding that reality is reality. Is it possible you read too much and don't live enough? At the moment, no, because I'm like, if you weren't here earlier, I'm like high on life at the moment. Read Barry Long. I'm not affiliated with the Barry Long Foundation. No, is it possible? At a certain point, I did read too much. And when you're reading in a sense of knowledge, you can easily read too much, and you end up with intellectual indigestion. And the way you take your massive intellectual crap. By the way, I think most academics have intellectual indigestion. What I mean by that is, it's like, what happens is they read and read, like constantly, even like 4 books a week, like they just constantly reading. And what initially is knowledge that could become understanding ends up as data. And you end up talking about philosophy. You end up talking about books. You end up talking about philosophers, as opposed to actually doing philosophy, conceptualizing biography, or whatever it might be. And so they end up intellectually with indigestion because there's a complete lack of experience. And so the way for academics and anyone who is has intellectual indigestion, which is this point where nothing's making any more sense anymore because you've taken in so much fucking knowledge and data, is to go experience, to go have experience. Experience is the laxative of academic guff, right? So is it possible I read too much and don't live enough? No. What's your favourite books I read in the last years? Blimey. Moby Dick, Suttree, The Recognitions, Butcher's Crossing. This is, obviously when your mind just goes completely blank from... I've never read a book. But the entire works of Bernhard, they go, but if I had to pick a few, The Lime Works, Gathering Evidence by Thomas Bernhard is absolutely one of the best books I've ever read. I'm trying to think through my shelves. The Golden Arse, which was the review. Any of the ones I reviewed, if I've reviewed something, then I would consider it worthy of chatting about. Yeah, those are a few. There's a handful. Have you been drinking? You've slurred a few words and seem a bit rebellious tonight. I'm a little bit tired, but I haven't been drinking. I don't drink. So, no. Bit rebellious. I told you. Man, the flowers are growing, the sun is out, and life is for living. Life's great. No, I've just been I've been a lot happier lately, which is it's a new thing for me. Yeah. So, no. I'll turn it down. Sorry. I just found your podcast a week ago and I've been really enjoying it, especially the playlist with the book reviews, which has given me a few books to check out. It sounded interesting. Thank you. Thanks for checking it out. I suppose you asked me about that to narrow down my politics. Yeah. So my politics, like I said, when we talk about politics, it's just a different thing. I mean, I don't want to say just, the whole typical read this, but I think in terms of understanding what politics even is now, read Foucault, read someone like Kittler, Kittler, by the way. I don't want to mispronounce that on stream. Read Friedrich Kittler, with a K. Read someone like McLuhan. Someone recommended his book on Formal Cause to me. What do I think? So before I get to the Evola question, someone asked me, why am I happier than before? It's because of Barry Long. I keep telling you, you need to know yourself. I'm not even kidding. It's probably just that I needed it. And it's one of those cases where a certain book at a certain time was blowing out the cobwebs. But honestly, Barry Long. And if I had to put it into a nutshell, years, and I think I was talking about this at the start of the stream, but years and years and years and years of pessimistic, misery-celled, intellectual man or woman in your 20s, and you are drawn to Camus and Chiron and Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, and ultimately a ton of misery sells, and philosophy believes that it's far more serious if it can say, look how bad and full of suffering life is. And, I think, honestly, as cheesy as Barry Long's teaching is, and probably many people will look him up and be like, what the hell is James doing looking at this guy? But the question of, there's a video, if you type in Barry Long suffering on YouTube, there's a question of him basically asking the question, have you had enough suffering? At what point is the suffering going to be enough for you to be like, okay, I can't, something has to change. And then that's an internal experiential thing where something is overhauled and you have to give a lot up and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, that's why I'm happier than before. What do I think of Evola? All right, this is another thing. I mean, I've been very critical of the right tonight. This is another thing. Many years ago now, there was sort of this resurgence on Evola in terms of people just saying, read Evola. That was the typical right-wing comment. Read Evola. And ultimately, one position for this was because Evola is the most if you think a thought, you have lost for Evola. He is the most right of right-wing figures. But the problem I had with the read Evola comments was usually I just assumed people hadn't read Evola, because if you open Revolt, and Evola is great on names for his books, but if you open Revolt Against the Modern World, you're not going to find really anything that seems distinctly related to politics. And you're going to find dense, esoteric jargon that is going to bore you to tears after about 10 pages. Yeah, that's my thoughts on Evola. Someone else said there he's unreadable, and I would pretty much agree. My thoughts on anti-natalism. The interesting question of anti-natalism, I think, is the one of suicide, of why not if you get to that point. But I think there's an assumption behind anti-natalism, right? So anti-natalism being the philosophy that existence is the suffering outweighs goodness so much in existence that that existence is bad. Like being basically being is bad. It's the irony with it is however much it has a resurgence or a popularity, it's not going to be popular for long, because those people aren't going to have kids and spread on the message. And I would say this in terms of antinatalism. There's 2 points. 1, touch grass, go outside, look at the flowers. And I mean that seriously as well. 2, I think at the point where you're sincerely looking into antinatalism and thinking like, oh yeah, that's how it is, you're in a bubble. You're in a very, very small philosophy is small anyway, and the more you get into niche philosophers, they're small. And if you're getting to the point of, you say, it's a recursive feedback loop that I've been close to for myself at points of, I will order another Chiron book, I will order another Eugene Thacker book, and after that I'm going to look at the Amazon recommendations of what other people who bought Thacker and Chiron also bought. And you end up in a feedback loop of your own miserable creation, and you're in an antinatalist bubble, and you need to be more honest about yourself. You need to be more honest about what you're seeing, because you're over-complexifying something like the sea or the beach or a tree. You need to go outside. You need to go have some experience, because you're theorizing of being, and it's no one ever said. So someone here says, I very much agree with your first point. Antinatalism always struck me as an outlet for bitter and depressed people to rationalize their own agony. Well, agony begets agony, and I would agree with Gurdjieff in that the last thing that man will ever give up is his misery. Absolutely attached to it. If you tell a man or a woman that they're choosing to worry, that they're choosing to be anxious about something that they can't control, that they're choosing to be sad when they really have no, to quote Darren Allen from his recent book, The Fire Sermon, you have no right to be unhappy, and that is a choice that you're making. Now, clinical severe depression, much like addiction, is a different thing. So what I mean in terms of the choice, like the early days of addiction, where you're making a little choice every now and again, but then eventually it becomes a habit, and then I think there is a line where we can say, okay, this has become a different thing now, and has to be treated in a different way. So I'm not saying depression is a choice, but worry and anxiety and much dismay is, and you get in a feedback loop of getting drawn down. I've been there myself, and it doesn't end. That fucking black pit, which is conflated with it being smart and being intelligent. Oh, woe is me, look how much suffering is in the world. That doesn't end, and it's your choice to keep going down it. And it's, at times, it is a sort of pride of not wanting to sort of look at a sunset and say, oh, for God's sake, why is that so beautiful, Or have a good meal, and go, you know what, well, I'm an antinatalist, but boy, this cheese and mushroom pasta is delicious. It doesn't make sense. Come on, touch grass. Get in your body, as someone said. Stop overcomplicating things, because there's a grasping here and a wanting to hold on and a wanting to know. You're not going to know. No one told you that life isn't going to be full of suffering and pain, but you can have pain and you can have suffering. Sorry, you can have pain and you can people are going to die. Everyone's going to die. Your pets are going to die. The flowers are going to die. But while they're here, you can enjoy them, and you can make the decision from that understanding that you don't need to suffer when they disappear. All the pain of death. I mean, what's worse, the death or all those people bemoaning the death around the person who's dying? Right? And that metaphor stands across everything. Anyway, there you go. I could rant against anti-natalism for quite some time, because the reason I'm a bit passionate about ranting against it is because I see late teen to late 20s, late teens to late 20s, men and women going around with these sullen thumb faces, like, this is so just, and I did it for a long time, and you don't need to. Yeah. Perhaps you, and I will just say, in philosophical circles, there's a pull towards that, as if admitting to suffering, being a Schopenhauerian, the world, woe is me, woe is the world. Oh my God, we're such a horrible, beings, or whatever it might be. The world is burning. There's a pull towards that, as if being more bleak is more truthful, and that's incorrect. Someone says, perhaps you already have some videos on this, but what are your thoughts on the various philosophical arguments for classical theism? If the arguments for classical theism worked as per the sort of joke from Kevin Hart, when evangelicals knocked on your door, they wouldn't ask you, have you felt the word of God? They would just give you Anselm's argument. If classical arguments for generally what is happening here is that people have already had somewhere an experience with regard to their God, or God in general, and then the arguments then fit, which is why you need to begin from the spirit first, because if there was such a thing as an argument for or against God, and it genuinely was an argument in the sense of, some like an engineering argument within the field of engineering will go, oh, you're right. Right? If there was such a thing, then people would be swayed, but they're not. And this ultimately is just intellectual and theological pride. You ignore the basics of the Beatitudes, or you ignore the basics of whatever it might be, for control, for some little area of land that then quickly becomes void of love and grace, because you're more interested in being right than being true. I never found one that convinced. I mean, they'll convince you once you're already convinced. Yeah. Any thoughts on J.D. Vance's Tolkien inspiration? I don't know. The only thing I know about Vance is he wrote Hillbilly Elegy, which I haven't read. I didn't know he had a Tolkien inspiration. But Tolkien's good fun. Tolkien. If I was to listen to one last piece of music, or if I had to listen to a piece of music while I was dying, which I don't want to do, it would be the Shire soundtrack. Genuinely, it came on in the car. I have classical FM on in my car, and it was on there, and I was driving through woodland with loads of shadows and the sun coming through, and I almost shed a tear, but I didn't, because I'm a bloody bloke. Are demons real? Well, I think possession is real, and I don't mean exorcist possession, but we see possession a lot. People get possessed by their emotions. people get so angry that they almost can't see. That's people get possessed in that way, or that people get possessed by anxiety. So in the sense of a demon I think a demon can be defined as that point where the decision is being made elsewhere, right? Like with addiction, we can classify, I think, that as a demon. But the current rhetoric around, everyone, the left say everyone I don't like is fascists, the right say everyone I don't like is demons. It's not helpful. It's very, very boring scapegoating that seeks to reduce. Once again, it's what Tom Berg would talk about as grasping, as control. Oh, I'm Group B. I don't like Group A. That thing I don't like, so it's Group A. I've controlled it. It's done. I don't have to listen to it anymore. They're fascists. Oh, they're demons. Don't have to listen to them anymore because I've defined those terms. It's infantile. It's stupid. Doesn't get anyone anywhere. I completely agree with you in regards to how people come to their beliefs. However, that doesn't say anything about the arguments themselves. No, I just found them interesting. If you there's a video, Docky Snake, that's your name. There's a video on polytheism with John Michael Greer where he does a much better job than I could describing this position regarding classical theist arguments. He's very, very good on them. So if you type in John Michael Greer or just type in search emetics for polytheism, that will probably interest you. Have I always been a spiritual person, or did an experience open you up to that world? No, I was nothing when I was young because I was baptized in the Church of England, which means you become an atheist. And then nothing. Then it was just like most people, like not a thing. I think that's important to emphasize because that's not atheist. Just nothing. That is not a factor of life. And then I was a militant atheist and anti-theist. Like I was very much in my early teens, a Hitchens, if we didn't have religion, everything would be fine. And then when I got into certain philosophers and people like Nick Land, then I got a bit closer to occultism. And before that, I'd done some meditation. I got into occultism, went through the ringer of occultism. And that opened me up to, there's something else. Chiron himself said, everything, even cynicism, become less relevant the more you talk about it and think about it. You can't keep up with emotionally, although it was always Chiron's philosophy. Except Chiron chatted a lot, it seems, I think there's a struggle somewhere in Chiron that scholars haven't got to be honest. There's a care in Chiron, I think. There's an affection, I would put it. The same thing we see in Bernhard, right? Bernhard, this great cynic, witty, sarcastic, biting writer. But what's he always talking about? He's always talking about humans. He's always talking about people and people's lives. I think he cares about people. And I think the same thing with Chiron. Is that he's always talking about being. He's talking about people struggling with being. I think there's a care there. Thoughts on Dostoevsky. I read Notes of the Underground a long, long, long time ago. Too young to really get too much from it. I've got... Actually, Brothers Karamazov arrived recently because someone really did the whole, no, you actually have to read it. So I haven't read anything other than that. Congrats on the milestone. What's the cost? That's a really good question. What's the cost of trying to figure out what Nick Land is on about and what's the reward? The cost is go read my early, fairly juvenile novel, Methodology of Possession on Nick Land. That's the cost if you really go deep, which is a sort of madness. But the reward, I would honestly say on this, the reward is both seeing the limits of philosophy and being on the absolute cutting edge of philosophy and having a fairly deep understanding of capitalism beyond politics. Yeah, that's the reward and the cost. Do I have children? If not, then all your philosophy is just games. I have no real stake in the world. I don't have children. No, I don't have children. I question whether or not maybe you could say philosophy is games. I don't think you need to not have children to say that philosophy is all games, because a lot of philosophy is games. A lot of it is just an interest. The notion that philosophy is changing the world in some, like someone's going to write the perfect philosophy book and suddenly change everything, I don't think many people really subscribe to that. It's a scholarship and an academy. In terms of having no real stake in the world, I would, there's a ton of axioms there regarding if I would say the ultimate axiom of the world would probably actually agree with this. I think this is perennial and runs across not only all religions but a lot of philosophy as well. The ultimate axiom of the world is one of suffering, and to alleviate suffering. And so maybe I'm not doing that, to be honest. I'm probably increasing it with the bloody podcast, let's be honest. But to say I have no real stake in the world would be to say that all the people who currently can't have children have no real stake in the world, and a ton of others have no real stake in the world. I don't see that. I see where you're coming from. I think in terms of politics, I have a lot of sympathy for the idea of a weighted voting in terms of people who are having children or have children. I actually do agree with that, because it is skin in the game. But no, I don't have children, no. Yeah. Is Nick Land still on this plane? I believe so. I completely agree with you about Tron. That touch of poetry they gave to what we knew before as pessimism. There is a beautiful care in there. Yeah, cool. So I will. Well, I'm not going to finish just yet, but I will just re-emphasize that the Aeon book link is in the chat, which is the Spiritual Introduction to Christianity, and then also my collection of short stories that you can buy, which is, now this is in my misery era, so maybe the next one will be like a book on beautiful flowers or something. I don't know. What are my thoughts on Ernst Junger's book on pain? What is my relationship with pain? Yeah, what does he say? He says, show me a man's relationship to pain and I will tell you who he is, or something like that, right? I've done a couple of patron-only talks on pain. I think that era of Junger is really underappreciated, really great. Same with The Worker. I will say this, though, that, and I discussed this with Winthrop Young, we both agreed on this. Junger, when he writes literature, Storm of Steel, well, actually not always literature, when he writes about war, when he writes about certain things, he's an incredible writer, no doubts. On Pain, which Winthrop Young described as a sort of almost too good translation because the German isn't that good, but The Worker is a terrible read, and Omishville I think is terribly, terribly written. It's a book of ideas that's got all this fluff sewn around it. It's awfully written, and Pain is very close. On Pain is very close to that. My relationship to pain, up until 2 years ago, was fairly meager. Actually, I was a bit, I don't know, I didn't have the best relationship to it. But then I passed a kidney stone thanks to Bob Dobbs, because he reset my RNA and I passed a kidney stone. That's legit. No, I passed a kidney stone 2 years ago, and the level of pain from a kidney stone is so much that you go beyond a threshold that you previously thought existed in a sort of Ptaian moment. And after that, things that were once an 8 become a 3, and you are given a strange perspective of pain. Yeah. So, yeah, my relationship with pain, I think pain is, if you focus on pain and make it suffer, you make it worse. A book on Freshers and Dodmans, that's the Norfolk language book. Yeah, I have got a novel that I'm working on that's going to include some Norfolk lingo. Yeah. Black Eagle says, we haven't improved on Buddha's insights in 2,500 years. It's over. It's been over for well, as per Buddhism, you just keep going round and round and round and round, right? How long have we been doing it? How long have we, not just 2,500 years, how long have we been doing this? Imagine the perfect mountain, a crystal mountain, and imagine I think it's a gull or an eagle with a silk scarf in its mouth, and every 100 years it flies over the mountain and brushes the scarf on the mountain. When the mountain is finally erased, then that's how long we've been doing it. Great. Round we go. Yeah. Whenever I increase metabolism, feel healthiest, not experiencing pain, etc., I feel like I'm in a dream. What mean? Well, pain in a way is grounding you to the body, which is then increasing your attachment to temporality, right? So if you read people like Ramana Maharishi, who talks about how, for instance, someone asking the difference between, and this is common in Hindu for the 3 states of waking and sleep, etc., Hinduism. If you read someone like Maharishi, who said someone's questioning about the difference between, was I really there when I was asleep and in a dream, and how do I know when I'm awake? And he points out this thing that in a dream you have that dream logic where you're suddenly in one room and it seems very real, and then like dream logic, something sort of there's a break or something folds, and you're somewhere else. And it's all very short. It feels maybe like an hour or something. And Maharishi basically says, look, just because that's shorter doesn't mean it's any different. I mean, if you think about it in terms of how things move and fold in dreams, when you are awake, anyone will know this who drives. You could drive for an hour and all of a sudden you go, oh, I'm here. And you actually don't know where you've been. And there's not much difference between that and dreams. And so I would say that pain is ironically sort of grounding you in a certain form of temporality. Yeah, I don't know. Have I read Saz's The Myth of Mental Illness, and do you have any thoughts on his main thesis that mental illness in general better described as an odd or unhealthy preferences than illness? I've read it. I didn't get too much from it. I mean, once again, this is a thing of certain axioms. I think an axiomatic problem, a foundational problem of, you can do this thing where you might be critical of psychology or critical of that establishment that are therapy and counselling or whatever it might be, or the mental illness, whatever that is, right? You can be critical of that. But then what you do is you go off and you read books like, and I'm not saying this to you, but generally you go off and read books like Myth of Mental Illness and a whole host, and people maybe like R.D. Laing, and you'll be like, this is all nonsense because I've read this. But the culture, the reality of mental illness as a thing is absolutely a thing. So whether or not, and I'm not saying either way, whether or not it exists or not, it is a thing. And I think with mental illness, this whole idea of myth of mental illness and people being critical of antidepressants, there is absolutely some legitimacy to these comments. But on the other hand, people, the ignorance around that would be, you need to meet someone whose life has been saved by taking such drugs or doing such things. The critique, I think, just needs more nuance. And I think, once again, you get these things where decisions, it's once again the line of where decisions can be made or no longer made. Yeah. Yeah. So any more questions? Any more before I log off for the night and touch grass and go look at the trees in my fury of happiness. Well, the Gene Wolfe, yeah, someone actually mentioned Gene Wolfe earlier. So at some point I will do a review of those books. Is the UK collapsing? No. I mean, you could abide by like Greer's idea of collapse as a slow descent, and I would be sympathetic to that. So, the NHS is under strain. A lot of things take a long time. Court cases take a long time to go through. A lot of infrastructure is breaking down. Is it collapsing? Possibly. Once again, it's the conflation of the UK with certain areas. I think most people are relatively fine, relatively all right. It's not linear. I think that's the problem. It's fragmented. Certain things collapse as certain things grow. It's difficult to talk about in that way. Do I like True Detective? I'd have to rewatch it now. Now that I'm like, now that I'm a bundle of joy, I would have to. No, I do like True Detective. I only like season 1 though. Any movie recommendations? Any movie? I would just recommend directors. Anything by Paul Thomas Anderson, who people like to dunk on because he's very studenty, but I just think he's like Phantom Thread is one of my favourite films. Anything directed by Hal Ashby, especially Harold and Maude and Being There, which are two of my absolute favourites. Leave No Trace is a favourite of mine. Yeah. There's not too many. I don't know. I know other than that, I do like sort of 80s action films. They're good fun. Yeah. But Harold and Maude especially is just fantastic. Really fantastic. Yeah. So, the Aguirre, Wrath of Non, it's alright. So the 2 book links are there right at the start of the chat if you want to support that way. If you've enjoyed this, quick and brief thoughts on Thomas Ligotti. Cheap selling of misery, or is there more behind it? Look, I don't know. It's tough. I think Ligotti's biography is a bit wrapped up in it as well. The conspiracy against the human race, to be honest, when you go into the deep dives of many of the thinkers that he's dealing with, so Schopenhauer, Chiron, Zapffer, when you really read those outside of the typical stuff that people would read, you'd understand it's far more nuanced than Ligotti. That is a nihilistically masturbatory book that isn't really taking the question seriously anymore. It's just saying over and over again, you don't realize how bad it is. Oh, get over yourself, Thomas. Yeah, but that said, his horror is fantastic. He is the true heir to Lovecraft. Let's be honest. Let's not beat around the bush on that one. Grim Scribe is fantastic. My Work Is Not Yet Done. It's fantastic. He's a great horror writer. And that is where the cosmic horror is, and that is where the philosophy of those things works best, I think. When it's pulled apart to be pure theory. 80s action films are the apex of American civilization. What was the last book that legitimately scared me? Or it was probably a book about the Titanic. It was probably A Night to Remember, because the descriptions of that sinking is pure horror. It's absolutely terrifying. That there was a moment in time where you had 1,500 people who, in every single direction they looked, 1,500 people who at that point in time were on this what was known as the securest object in the world, the largest moving object in the world at that point, that was then sinking, and that in every single direction they looked was a black abyss on one of the darkest nights of the year, with a sea that was so calm you couldn't even see like ripples, and with a sea temperature that was minus 2.2, which when you dive into it would feel like they described it as 1,000 daggers diving into you. And so the bit that terrified me the most is imagining being in a black abyss in water beyond freezing. And of all the people who went in the water, only 3 were rescued. And not only that, but it hasn't gone silent. Everyone is screaming, but you also hear a however many ton ship, the Titanic, as it goes down, the places that still had air finally hit enough pressure that they literally exploded. And you hear this sort of aching metallic beast exploding and groaning as it descends 12,000 feet, which was your last point of refuge, as in every way you look is a black abyss. And that's really well described in A Night to Remember, the horror of that moment. It was genuinely, like, that was sort of oddly horrifying to read. Yeah. Please try to get Zero H.P. Lovecraft on to discuss the horror genre if I can. I don't know where. Probably not something I do, because I have a rule about real names. Yeah. Unfortunately. But yeah. Yep. The ship descending into the depths is definitely not a nice thought. No. And also, later on, Robert Ballard. Oh, I'll look at that in a sec. That question, I just saw it. There's another book by Bob Ballard, who was the first to find the Titanic, and he describes that, we didn't know where it sank for so long. And then in the 80s, he took a little ship down. And the thing is, this is at a depth where even if you have an extremely powerful light, it's only going to shine about, 20 feet ahead. So they were aimlessly searching around in a black abyss. And they found the boilerplate, and then they're like, okay, so it must be nearby. And so 70 years later, all of a sudden, out of a black abyss just appears this ship, which is out. And the ship, by the way, with the movement of the sea down there, the shipwreck groans and moans. So suddenly you've found this aching beast that has, and there was no bones because I think the pressure of the sea. They were like, oh, we're going to suddenly find thousands of skeletons, and they didn't. Is there any overlap with Long's knowing yourself and Gurdjieff's self-knowledge? Absolutely. Long is directly influenced by Gurdjieff, but he cuts away all the crap. So that's why I really like. He cuts away and manages to get under your skin very quickly. What's the reasoning behind the rule? The reasoning behind that rule isn't really anything against people who are anonymous, but it's more about a certain form of online culture that I don't really want to beget or bring about, that is in a way like unserious, if that makes sense. So I do try keep the discussion somewhat sincere and serious, etc. And so there's a certain sense of, this week I'm interviewing, I don't know, whatever silly name it might be. And I don't have any interest in podcasts that are random online people in a room that are influencers just chatting to each other. I have no interest in that. So it's a rule of bringing about a certain standard, basically. Same way I won't just interview someone who hasn't actually done anything. You have to have a book or something like that, right? What is my third favourite McCarthy novel? So it would be Suttree, then Blood Meridian. Third, it's between The Passenger or Outer Dark. Yeah. Have I played the video game Inside? I have, actually. I don't play games much anymore, but years and years and years ago when I did play Inside. I thought it was quite a nice little thing. Yeah, but I don't anymore. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to call it, but it's been great chatting to you guys. Thanks for all the... Okay, well, what are my favourite books about Gurdjieff? Anything by Kenneth Walker. Anything by Maurice Nicoll. Can I talk about Rudolf Steiner more? I've got an episode coming up on Rudolf Steiner. I can't talk about him now because there's a lot, there's a lot to say. But there is one more. There's an episode on Rudolf Steiner coming up with Aaron French, and then I think we're also going to record another one specifically on philosophy of freedom. Me and Aaron French once again. So more coming up on Steiner. Stay happy. Stay happy. What we mean is don't stay unhappy. Thanks all. Yeah, like, subscribe, all that lovely stuff. If you enjoy the podcast, thanks for all your support. Thanks for getting me to 20k. It's all to do with you guys. Thanks to the guests. Thanks to listeners. Thanks to paying patrons. And yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for everyone for turning up.